Welcome back. We're here to talk about forms. I'm Kreg Wagner, legal counsel for the UAR.
I'm Peter Christensen, the forms chair for 2024 and UCAR CEO.
So the form that we have that we want to talk about, this is a new form that replaces an old form. Okay, so this replaces the Escrow Instructions. And this form allows the respective brokerages to agree to compensation. And it's called the Real Estate Brokerage Compensation Agreement. Okay, so Peter, give us a brief overview of what this form entails.
So under the current terms of the settlement, it is still allowed for a brokerage, a listing brokerage, to compensate a buyer's brokerage in a real estate transaction. So similar but a little different to the system now, because the MLS offer of compensation will not exist, but individual brokerages could negotiate this under the current terms, still paying out a commission. And so that's what this form facilitates, is in a transaction, the listing brokerage paying the buyer's brokerage's commission.
Excellent. So it's a simple one-page agreement between the respective brokerages. It highlights really clearly what the amount's going to be, what is the duration. It goes through that, yes, the buyer's brokerage and the listing brokerage have authorization from their respective clients in order to go ahead and do this. Obviously, there are benefits to a buyer because their obligation under the buyer-broker agreement could be offset or satisfied by this agreement. There are obviously some benefits to a seller for listing brokers because they then have more potential buyers taking a look at the property. You'll notice that it does make condition of payment. So whatever the buyer's brokerage and the listing brokerage agree here is conditional upon the successful closing of the real estate transaction. So just because someone's entered into this agreement doesn't automatically obligate the listing brokerage to pay that compensation. There has to be a successful close. And what's interesting too, and this should be familiar to realtors out there, is that there is an obligation to arbitrate. Arbitration, what are some of the benefits of arbitration and how does that, you don't have to go into too much detail, but what does that process look like, Peter?
Yeah, it's a lot quicker and cheaper way to resolve a commission dispute than having to turn to the court system. So arbitration's been used in the realtor world for a long time, and I think it's very beneficial. So if there is a dispute over commissions, rather than having to file a lawsuit, and depending on how much that amount is, it could go to district court versus small claims court and can become very costly to enforce. You can go to the association and use their arbitration program, and it's quick and easy and doesn't require a ton of excessive fees.
Yeah, and so we've built in language that addresses kind of the Article 17 obligation for realtor members to arbitrate contractual matters between themselves. And so this will kind of replace some of those procuring cause arbitration disputes. So we go through this, and that's frankly the extent of it. I do want to highlight who signed. So frankly, those brokers out there, you're going to have to highlight designate authorization to your agents as to whether or not they're authorized to enter into these types of agreements, similar to a listing agreement or a buyer-broker agreement. We also have here acknowledgement by the principals in the transaction. This can be similar to the seller's disclosures and a buyer signing, just acknowledging that they've received it. And I think it's really good to have here because it helps you as the buyer's representative or the seller's representative show that you've met your fiduciary duty of full disclosure, that any pertinent facts related to the real estate transaction. Simply because you have authorization to enter into these agreements, I'd say you still have an obligation to disclose and make sure that your clients are aware of what the terms of those agreements are.
Yeah, and I think it should be noted these signatures are not binding, as in they're not required to have this be effective. So if listing brokers and buyer's brokerage sign this agreement, it's effective, but really nice in just showing, yeah, the buyer and seller is totally transparent. they're aware of this arrangement. They've signed off on it. It's in compliance with all other agreements that are in place, buyer broker, listing agreement. It all works together. And so, yeah, good little extra insurance. I would say it would be advised to try to get those signed, especially it's probably going to be the buyer's brokerage that's initiating this. Great to start off with, hey, buyer has taken a look at this. They're cool with this arrangement, and send it over. And it should probably arrive with that buyer's signature. That would be ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not something that you would have to use, but it's another tool that's at your option, so that you have plenty of options dealing with compensation and working on the best interests of your client. We'll go through in maybe future videos about scenarios of where maybe this would be used or likely benefits to using this, but that's really kind of the ins and outs of this form.